Hello everybody, Raven Knight here. Today is going to be kind of interesting. So, I know that this is technically a response video, but I'm actually not making this to criticize or make fun of anyone, right? So, here's what happened. The other day, I stumbled across this video from a channel called Bookfox. The video is called 8 Ways Your Writing Reveals That You Don't Understand Women. Now, the title alone shocked me, so I immediately wanted to pick up the video and take a look at it, and here's what it's basically about. It's essentially a message to male authors out there to look out for these 8 mistakes you may make when writing women that reveal you don't actually understand women, or you're writing them poorly, or what have you. Now, I'm a male author, I'm a passionate writer, and I love literature, so I figured I would take a look at this video with you guys and hear out these 8 little warnings about writing women and see if I'm doing it right. Since this is addressed to male authors, let's use my male writer avatar. There we go. Put that in there. Looks good. And also, I do want to preface before we get started that while this is a response video, like I said, I'm not here to criticize this person. I'm not here to make fun of their channel or make fun of their takes. Not at all. Honestly, I am just here to hear their thoughts, analyze them, break them down, and offer my 2 cents. Maybe even have an interesting discussion. And if Bookfox, if you end up watching this video, know that I make this in full good intention. You did say in your video that you are open to discussion and you do read the comments on the video, so I just figured I'd do this in a different format. So let's have some fun. Let's take a look at this and see what these 8 pieces of advice are.
These are 8 ways that male authors get female characters completely wrong, and also some practical things that you can do to solve these problems. Now men, you should watch this so you don't get posterized on Reddit for writing women terribly. And then women, you probably want to watch this just to see whether you agree with me or not, but I do think there is, say, 1 or 2 problems that you might fall into as well. So we're gonna go over 8 common mistakes, and the very last 2 are probably the most important ones. Let's start with number 1. Making women incapable. So Reese Witherspoon runs one of the biggest book clubs in the world, Reese's Book Club, and she argues that one of her least favorite lines of dialogue from female characters is, "What do we do now?" What this does is it makes your female characters very passive. Now, is it the biggest problem in the world if this happens once? Well, I mean, no, but what if most of your female characters do it? Or what if it happens across multiple books? Now, a good test to see whether you're making this mistake in your fiction is trying the Toriel test, which is from Lord of the Rings, specifically from The Hobbit. And this test simply asks, do you have a female character who is good at her job? Evangeline Lilly plays the woodland elf Toriel in the movies, and she is leader of the Mirkwood Guards, and she is a very, very, very capable fighter. Now, obviously this isn't canonical Tolkien, it wasn't in the books, but they added it for the movie because they needed a strong feminine character. But I think this test is very useful because if you don't have at least a single female character who's good at her job, you're probably tending towards making your female characters incapable.
Okay, so I mostly agree with this one, but I do have some concerns. So, if you're going to write female characters, or any characters really, it makes sense that they be capable in some area or ability. We all have our gifts and talents in some areas. However, my first criticism with this issue is what happens when the woman is in a situation in which she has no ability or experience. So, for example, you use Toriel as an example, but the situation she was in the movie was one she was prepared for. She's a warrior, and her task was to fight the orcs in Lake Town. She is experienced in fighting, like we see that throughout the movie. She is a gifted warrior and fighter, but what if she were put in a situation where she has to win a cooking contest? I don't know if she's capable at cooking. I don't know how gifted she is in that area. We don't know. What if she was asked to win a bobsledding championship? Would she be capable in that area? See, that's what I mean. We have our capabilities, but are we always suited to the circumstances we're in? Like, a zombie apocalypse gets started. Are we all capable at surviving zombies? Let me give you an example from a movie. In Jurassic World, when Owen Grady and Claire, I forget her last name, are lost in the park with man-eating dinosaurs. Claire is not a soldier. She's not a dinosaur expert. She's out of her depth. None of what she's about to engage in would suggest that she has the capability in this situation. If Claire turns to Owen and says, "What do we do now?" that makes perfect sense for her to say that. It would actually make far less sense if she started to show unrealistic capability here, which she kind of does. There's a scene when she rescues the boys by picking up a submachine gun and gunning down a dinosaur. When did we know that she was capable of using a gun? When did she know that she was capable of doing this? I'm not saying she can't be. I'm saying nothing about her character showed us that she would have this capability. See, that's what I'm trying to get at. Characters should be capable, but limit the capability to what makes sense for them. If you have a character who has been shown to be a gifted fisherman, but he's lazy and he naps all the time, he's probably not about to bust out some kung fu moves unless you reveal that he used to be a kung fu master back in the day. Like, these things have to make sense. You know what I'm saying? So while I agree with your point, I think that context matters, and I'm going to be saying that a lot in this video. My second concern regarding this is something that you said, and I'm going to bring this up a lot too. Tariel was in the movie, you said, not the book, because the movie needed a strong female character. Those are your words. But I'm thinking back to my reading of the Hobbit book, and I don't remember any strong female characters. In fact, I don't remember many female characters at all. So I would ask, is it a problem if there are none? You state the movie needed a strong female character, but did it? I'm not bashing Tariel. I thought she did fine for her role, but would you say the book suffers from her absence? Is the movie made better by Tariel's presence? Now, again, this isn't a criticism. I'm actually curious about your stance on that, because I thought the Hobbit book worked wonderfully without her and without female characters in general, but at the same time, there are very few, if any, women in the Hobbit book, so is it also wrong to not have any women in a story? I don't know. This is all fascinating discussion, and I'd love your take on this. Do you think that the Hobbit book is inferior to the movie because it lacks females in it? I would love your thoughts on that. Let's keep going.
A second mistake a lot of male writers make about women is just a basic ignorance of the physical. So on social media, I saw someone complaining about a book they'd recently read. And in it, a female character is washing someone else's blood out of their own clothing. And the omniscient narrator says, oh, she had never washed blood out of her clothing before. I'm guessing that author has never lived with a woman before, or is maybe even aware that women have periods. I find that male authors are often ignorant about makeup as well. The mascara never smears, the lipstick never comes off, and they never take time to actually apply makeup. In the book Silence of the Lambs, when Clarice is preparing to meet Dr. Lecter, she worries that she looks too young. So what that means is obviously she would be wearing makeup in an attempt to appear older, right? But she says right before she meets him, she goes in the bathroom, this is in the books by the way, and splashes a whole bunch of water on her face, which she wouldn't do if she had put on a lot of makeup. And the third thing is just general ignorance about the body. There's this Australian writer named Michael Robotham, and he wrote a book called When You Are Mine. And here is a quote that you will not believe from that book. I found myself wondering whether my ovaries had made a decision for me. They sometimes jiggle when I'm around a man I fancy. Honestly, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I guess I'm going to laugh, but woo. Ovaries do not become aroused by the opposite sex. Like that's just not a thing.
Okay, I can again agree with this for the most part. Understanding certain aspects of a woman's behavior, habits, and sensations is important. Although, if I were to play devil's advocate for a moment, in your first example where the woman, quote, had never had to wash blood out of her clothes, and you point out that the woman has periods and that they'd have to wash blood out of their undergarments, this is true. But I'd argue the narrator is not inferring to the act of literally washing blood, but having to remove the signature of death from herself. To give an example, like, I think back to Casino Royale when Vesper helps Bond kill that man in the stairwell, and Bond finds her later sitting in the shower having a complete breakdown where she says, it's like there's blood on my hands and it's not coming off. She had no physical blood. In fact, she didn't even get her hands bloody in the fight, but it is her first time witnessing and being involved with killing someone, and that takes a psychological toll. Perhaps the narrator is not directly or literally saying it's for the first time that she's washing blood out of her clothes, but using that phrase as a symbolic or metaphorical way of saying she was traumatized by why the blood was there. Like, for example, like, you know, like, I'm not a woman, but if I was a woman and I was in a situation where I was attacked and I had to defend myself and I stabbed the guy and I get his blood all over me, you know, I just killed somebody. So even though I'm washing blood out of my clothes, I may be used to blood in my undergarments due to the periods, but, you know, this is still someone else's blood in my clothes. It's a totally different scenario. I'd argue that's what they're trying to do. Now, with all that said, that last line you read, though, was definitely cringe. I will not deny that. That last line was absolute dog crap. I would need to read the full thing for context, granted, but yeah, based on what you read, that was, that was pretty bad.
Okay, for the next mistake, let's consider number 3, attractiveness as the sole measure. So there can be a tendency in a lot of books, both written by men and written by women, to associate beauty with goodness. And what this looks like is the main character, the hero, is always extremely good looking, while the villain is always ugly and a hag. I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and say that beauty is not associated with moral goodness. There's no correlation. So just an example of this, so you know I'm not making it up, is in Rick Riordan's The Lightning Thief. He often describes the antagonists as being ugly and fat, like the minor antagonist Clarice, who is unattractive and overweight. And on the other hand, his female heroines are always exceptionally beautiful, like Annabeth Chase. And I do think that sometimes female authors can make this mistake as well when they write tropes like the smart but ugly sister versus the beautiful but dumb sister. Or sometimes a sneaky way to prioritize beauty above all else is when you describe a certain character as being past their prime, like, oh, this character used to be beautiful 10 or 20 years ago. I don't think that's a good way to describe someone. What you're really saying is the most important part about this female character is their sex appeal, and guess what? They don't have it anymore. However, if I'm wrong about this, you can roast me in the comments. I am fine with having a debate on this. Let's go. And in general, I'd say that film and TV has exacerbated this problem. Most shows, everyone is just absolutely gorgeous, which is why it's really refreshing when you see a character who looks just normal. In the show The Perfect Couple, starring Nicole Kidman, there is a detective in that show. She is played by Donna Lim Champlin, and she is just very normal looking. She's decidedly not pretty. She definitely wasn't cast for her looks, but she looks like the type of actress who would actually be a small town detective. And guess what? She is an absolutely fantastic actress, probably my favorite character in the whole show. And it's just refreshing to see a female lead that isn't dependent upon her beauty to carry her.
All right. First of all, please don't take this the wrong way, but you are aware you kind of indirectly said she's not attractive, right? Like you're saying, wow, you played such a good role in the show and you don't even look good. I mean, I know that's not what you're meaning. I know that's not the intended message, but I couldn't help but laughing because that's what I thought you were going to. I thought that was what you were trying to say for a minute. Like, are you saying like, oh man, you played such a good role. You did so good and you don't even look hot. I'm so sorry. Now on to the actual criticism. Yeah, I agree, but to a point. You know, if you look back into our ancient history, fables and fairy tales from ancient days have used physical appearance often to insinuate good and evil. The handsome knight, the fair maiden, the warty witch, the monstrous dragon. Like, I think it's very common for us to run to that remembered and familiar trope, and I don't think it always serves us well, granted, but at the same time, I think that this trope has been subverted quite frequently, where you have a character who uses their physical appearance to manipulate others to get their way. Like Beauty and the Beast, I think, is a great example of this. Like, you look at Gaston, he's easily the most physically attractive male in the movie. Like, he's got the muscles, he's got the chiseled jawline, he's got, you know, the skill at hunting and fighting. They have a whole song about how awesome he is, but you learn he's not a good guy at all. He's a spoiled, selfish bastard who, you know, will do anything for his own gain, including hurt Belle and her family to get what he wants. Meanwhile, Beast is the ugly, scary monster who turns out to be the good one at heart, and you have to learn that about him. So we've seen it subverted before. It's not like it hasn't been, but I understand what you're saying. Actually, funny enough, to give another example of this, I would say that you look at something like Frozen. I'm not a big fan of Frozen, but you got to give credit. You know, they did this. Like Hans, the guy that turns out to be the villain in the end, he was definitely the best looking guy in the movie. Like, he was all sorts of physically conventionally attractive, but it turns out he was the evil one. He was the bad guy. Meanwhile, Kristoff, while definitely not ugly per se, he was definitely not as good looking as Hans, and he turns out to be the good guy in the end. Like, so you can see this subverted. Actually, I've seen it happen where the subversion was subverted. In Jim Carrey's The Mask, you have Jim's character meet Tina Carlisle, who we think is going to be his love interest, but it turns out later that it's a twist. She is the girlfriend of the antagonist, Dorian, and we realize that she's been manipulating people using her beauty and charm to help Dorian with his criminal activities, and we believe that this other female lead in the movie, named Peggy, who is friendly with Jim's character, will end up being the real love interest in the end, because we've all seen that, you know, trope before. Though she's not as beautiful as Tina, beauty isn't everything. It's all about how they treat you and what they're like, because she's nice to the protagonist, she's nice to Jim's character, character. You know, Jim Carrey's character likes her, and there's even a moment where he thinks that she's going to kiss him, but then it turns out, no, she isn't. It turns out she's working for Dorian, while it was Tina who was sick of Dorian and was falling for Jim's character. I found that quite interesting. It was a subversion of a subversion. Wow, I thought that was neat. But, you know, enough about that. I could go on forever about that kind of stuff. I can, for the most part, agree with the stance that good and beauty should not always be related. You're allowed to make characters as attractive or unattractive as you like. But I do think there is something to be said about that time-honored trope, you know? But whatever, let's keep going.
The next mistake is crucial to avoid. Number 4, lack of story involvement. So here's a question for you. Do your female characters affect the plot? Or are they just serving sort of as prop pieces for your male characters? Now, a great test to determine this is the Mako Mori test, which comes from the movie Pacific Rim. And it simply asks, do you have a female character who has an independent story arc that doesn't just support the male story arcs? Now, Mako Mori inside the movie actually is a great example of this. She survives an attack as a child, but then loses her parents, seeks revenge, and wants validation from her adopted father, Pentecost. She is definitely not a sidekick character. She is a standalone character in her own right. Now, if you want a book that fails the Mako story test, I'll give you an example. The 23 books of The Adventures of Tintin, or if you're French, Tonton, written by Hergé. So in this book, female characters are almost non-existent. If they appear, it's like very much in the background, not as major characters at all.
Okay, now see here, this goes back to my previous question about The Hobbit. Is it wrong to not have female characters prominently in your book? Based on this criticism, it seems you're saying it's wrong. Now, I could be misunderstanding, but you've said that we should apply the Mako Mori test to our books to see if there's at least one woman with her very own story arc. And then you claim The Adventures of Tintin fails this test because it barely has any woman at all. So, my question for you is, would you go on record as saying that The Adventures of Tintin has failed? Like, is it wrong somehow? By this logic, any book that does not feature women prominently is somehow of lower grade or quality, or at the very least, it indicates there's a mistake that's been made. And I'm not sure I would agree with that. Because, I mean, think about context. Like, if I'm telling the story of a pirate ship and all the pirates on it are male, is that already like, oh, red flag, you got to have one woman in there, man? Like, I feel like if we make that a checkbox, like, hold on, do we have women? I feel like that's already a little bit unnecessarily restrictive. Don't get me wrong, I understand what you're saying, but this criticism sounds weird to me.
Now, maybe your book does feature female characters in a much more prominent role than Tintin does. But you also have to watch out for ideas like the damsel in distress, which is where you have a female character who occupies a very central role, but they're only existing to give the male character something to do, to support the male character's arc.
Okay, is that a bad thing? Look, okay, this may be a hot take, but I don't see a problem with a damsel in distress. Don't get me wrong before you come to crucify me. Hear me out. Don't overdo it, you know? Don't make a meme out of it like with April O'Neil or Lois Lane, where their whole character is nothing but being captured and then being saved. But having a female love interest captured or in danger and in need of rescue is not inherently wrong by itself. I mean, it's a motivation as old as time. I don't see that as a real problem. Why is it a problem? The average answer is it deprives the woman of power or self-reliance. Right. Okay, so let me provide this hypothetical. If a bus is about to fall off the ledge of a cliff and Superman flies by to save it, should Superman stop and go, hold on, there are women on that bus. Let's see if they can, empower their way out of it. Let's see if they have the self-reliance to get themselves out of this. No, I like Superman to save them, because I believe there are circumstances where perhaps rescue is in order. That's why we have firefighters and police officers in real life, friends, because no matter how capable you may be, there are going to be circumstances where you find yourself in where you can't get out of it and you need help. So I don't think there's anything wrong at all with having a circumstance where your female character is in trouble and is in need of saving. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't turn it into an overused meme where that's all the character is. That would be what I say about that.
Now, I'll say one more thing about this. Everything I've said so far in this video has been about female protagonists, main characters who are women. It's just as important to make sure the background characters, like the extras in your novel, also are sometimes female, right? Females are 50% of the population, so don't make all the background characters just a default of men.
Okay, not to repeat myself, but again, it seems you're saying it's necessary and important that some women be involved, even if just background characters. So would a book like The Hobbit, in which there are few, if any, female characters given by name, be bad? Again, no criticism meant here. I'm just trying to get to a standard. I'm just trying to understand where we're at here. You know what I'm saying? I just want to know where we sit.
Now it is time for the fifth mistake, which is a lack of psychology. If in your book you have a female walking alone at night and you never have once come into her head that she might be scared for her safety, you're not really tapping into what a woman would think in that circumstance. Another example, if you have your female lead travel to a country like Egypt by themselves and not think of their own physical safety, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. When I traveled through Egypt, I was with a woman, and the number of cat calls that she got walking down the street with me right next to her, was astonishing. So, you just have to be aware of these things as a guy. This is the female experience in the world.
Okay, well, context matters, my friend. So, how to best explain this? Let's take my character, Rebecca Anderson. Rebecca Anderson, she's walking alone through the woods at night. Is she afraid for her safety? My answer would be, no, she's not afraid. And you might think, well, I don't believe that. But what if I were to tell you that she's a monster hunter who specializes in killing the creatures that go bump in the night, and the hope of finding a monster excites her because it'll give her something to fight and kill? Could you believe it now? And sorry, this is going to sound mean, but your advice seems to be to remember women are vulnerable. They live in a world in which they could be harmed, and we need to make sure we take that mentality into account. Okay. But the first mistake you asked us to watch out for in this video was to make sure that our ladies are capable. Don't make them incapable. They have to be capable. They're not confused, lost, or otherwise unable to act, perform, or engage. So I suppose it comes down to this question. Are we writing vulnerable flower petals who shrink back at the proposition of being by themselves in this cold, cruel world? Or are we writing capable, strong, confident women? Now, don't bother answering. I'll do it for you. The answer is that it highly depends on the character and context. So Rebecca Anderson, as I said, is a monster hunter trained from childhood to hunt werewolves, vampires, zombies, and other horrors of the night. She's not scared of the dark. She runs to it. She could care less if she gets catcalled. She knows she could body anyone who tried something funny. She's a badass with a pistol and a sword, and she's not afraid to use either one. Okay? So there's that. Meanwhile, let me present another one of my characters, Jenna Corvus. She's a college girl with a great amount of anxiety and nerves. She was born with a rare condition which gave her 4 arms instead of 2, and she feels self-conscious, isolated, and singled out. She fears bullying, judgment, and labeling. She's scared of the dark, scared to be made a fool, and clings to her close friends and roommates for emotional support. She would definitely be afraid if she were alone at night. Now, taking these two characters, Rebecca does not violate your first mistake, for she is certainly capable in terms of fighting and standing up for herself. But she does violate this mistake, for she is not psychologically terrified of the world she lives in. Meanwhile, Jenna doesn't violate this mistake because she's definitely fragile and worried about her surroundings and who could hurt her. But she does violate mistake number 1, as she doesn't feel very capable in her own skin and has to learn her capabilities and strengths as she goes forward. So what's the solution here? Is Rebecca poorly written? Is Jenna poorly written? I mean, I'm my own worst critic, so either could be written poorly, I suppose. And I'm not criticizing here either. I'm seriously just engaging in discussing. That's all I'm doing. I'm presenting my observations and thoughts. I just want to take a look at this and help understand to my audience and to you, the video creator, Bookfox, that I see what you're trying to say, but I see some issues, if you know what I mean. I see some problemos, but let's keep going.
The second thing you have to pay attention to is the social. Sometimes men will write women, and the women won't have any close female friends at all. They'll be very socially isolated. It just doesn't take into account like how women exist in the world. This is what the Bechdel test was actually created to measure, because you have to have 2 female characters who are both named, and they're talking to each other about something other than a guy.
Okay, again, I would argue context matters here. Rebecca Anderson, I'll bring her up again, has very few female relations as she travels the country on motorcycle searching for monsters to hunt. I understand your point here, though. I do get it. Social interaction is something that needs to be taken into account in most circumstances with men and women. I think one thing that a lot of authors fail to do is have realistic interaction with people. That's why understanding dialogue and realistic speaking is so important. You need to master the voice, you know what I'm saying? So I get that. I understand that necessity. But I do, again, think that context matters.
And the third thing I want to say about psychology is make sure you get tricky stuff like infertility right. To write a woman who is struggling with infertility, you have to work on really getting their psychology right. How hurtful it is to struggle with something like that. How they feel socially. How it affects how they relate to their partner. How it affects how they think about themselves as a woman. And plus, you just have to know like medical procedures like the turkey baster method and exactly how many needles and shots it takes to go through a process like IVF. It's a lot. It is a lot. As someone who did this with my wife, trust me, it is a lot of needles. Way more needles than you would think.
I'll take your word for it on that. And not sure I'll ever write my characters in that scenario, but what I would recommend is, in all things, do research and talk to women who may have experienced such things. It will behoove you. This is something that I advise to all my people out there who want to be writers. Like, people say, how do I write this? How do I write that? I always say the same thing. Do your research. Talk to people who've gone through it. If I were writing a character, right, who was a woman who's pregnant, I would talk to people who've gone through pregnancy, ask what are some of the struggles and hurdles they had to overcome, what some of the sensations they've gone through, what's that like, like stuff like that. And, get a better understanding, because if you just type what you think you know, you have a higher chance of getting it wrong. But talking to people, learning, doing your research, it will help you tremendously. So I think that's just something you should do as a writer in general.
A sixth mistake that some writers make when writing about female characters is no agency. Does the female character in your story make decisions that are independent of men? I'm talking about choices, real choices. So here's an exercise for you. I want you to choose one of your female characters and list every decision that they make in your book. But these decisions, they have to affect the plot in some way. They have to be decisions of consequence. And also, romantic decisions about men don't count. I'm looking for other types of decisions. Now, a test to see whether you're doing well in this category is the sexy leg lamp test. This got its name from the sexy leg lamp in The Christmas Story, and it basically asks, can your female character be replaced with a sexy leg lamp, and it won't make a difference in your story at all. Applying a test like that to your fiction, make sure you don't have like a strong female character that's maybe action oriented or just physically strong or something, but they don't make any decisions that actually affect the plot.
That sexy leg lamp test sounds kind of fragile to me. It must be Italian. Anyone who got that joke, you are a superstar, and know that your little Orphan Annie secret decoder pin is in the mail. All joking aside, I actually agree with this. Agency isn't just crucial for women characters. It's crucial for character writing as a whole. Your characters are yours to direct, but they have to feel alive to your readers, and giving them the capacity to choose their directions is very important. But with that said, there is a caveat that I'd like to propose. There are some people in this world who are simply followers by nature. They are indecisive, and they prefer to let others make choices for them. Not to say they don't make any choices in their lives, but they tend to choose a leader they trust and follow them. Like, I'll give an example. I was watching The Land Before Time the other day, the Don Bluth movie, and I noticed as I was watching that only 2 characters in the herd, in the group of kids, who seemed to make any regular and informed choices were Littlefoot and Sarah. The rest of the group, Ducky, Spike, and Petrie, chose one or the other to trust and follow. Those 3 are not natural leaders and choose instead to trust in the direction of another. Like, at first they follow Littlefoot because he's the one who's willing to associate with them. He's willing to form a group, and he has information on how to get to the Great Valley, which is their major destination. However, Sarah shows up and warns that she saw Sharptooth, the big enemy dinosaur, and Littlefoot doesn't believe her until Sharptooth shows up, and now their faith in Littlefoot is shaken. Meanwhile, Sarah is the strong, confident woman who, knows what she's doing, knew about Sharptooth, and claims she knows the easy way to get to the Great Valley. And so the group is kind of like, man, why should we follow Littlefoot? He's taking the tough, difficult road, and he was wrong about Sharptooth. We may want to follow Sarah now. She knows what she's doing.
Go on! Go the wrong way! We never wanted you with us anyway! Come on! We have to keep going!
Sarah's way is easier.
I think so, too.
And so they split up the group again, but then Sarah ends up leading them the wrong way, which means Littlefoot has to come in and save them, and thus the team dynamic changes again. But you'll notice Littlefoot and Sarah are the 2 leaders. They're the ones making decisions, and the others are following them. Spike, Petrie, and Ducky very rarely, if ever, make major decisions on their own other than who they choose to follow.
Sarah?
Sarah, come back! Come back!
Sarah was still too proud to admit that He'd gone the wrong way.
Now, does that make them bad characters? I wouldn't say so. I'd say that they're still decent characters, even if they don't have as much agency as maybe Sarah or Littlefoot display. Another example I would talk about is Karlach from the game Baldur's Gate 3. Now, granted, she is technically a side character in a video game, but Karlach, as you mentioned in your example, is a large, powerful warrior woman, but she also has an indecisive attitude. She's uncertain about the right choice of action in certain cases, like, for example, her parasite, which she could choose to focus on and learn to harness its power before it kills her. She isn't confident in how to approach that. She'll ask you, the player, a lot, what do you think is the best course of action? If you talk to other characters, they usually have a very strong stance. Some will say, nope, we shouldn't use it. Others will say, yes, we should use it. But she's very much, I'm not sure. I just don't know. She also isn't confident enough to ask you to stay faithful to her while she waits to get her personal ailment cured. Like, she's totally fine with you hanging out or having relations with other people because she recognizes that she's hard to be with due to her ailment. So she's not a very decisive person. She fits more in as a follower than a leader. But with that said, Karlach does make decisions, like she chooses to fight the Paladins of Tyr and escape the Hells. She chooses to run away from Zariel. She has the capacity to make choices that impact her in the story. But my point is that there will be characters in the world and in our stories who do not often want to make the difficult choices, and that does need to be considered. I'm not saying they can't make choices, but that could be a character trait that they have where they're very indecisive. It goes back to that old joke about men and women. Like, you ask the woman, where do you want to go to eat? I don't know. No, where do you want to eat? I don't care. Where do you want to eat? You choose. And then the man chooses and they don't like where they went. Why didn't you give me an option? Like, it's a joke. I know it's a stereotype, but stereotypes do come from somewhere. And speaking of stereotypes,
a seventh mistake that I feel is very common is stereotyping women. I feel like there are two ways that you could possibly stereotype your female characters. One would be just have a character with all female traits, like very feminine traits. Baking, interior decorating, yoga, gardening. It might be a good idea to throw in at least one trait which isn't stereotypically feminine, so they feel like a real human being rather than a caricature. Yet on the opposite side of the spectrum, I do think there's a problem with having a female character with zero feminine traits at all. This is usually called the man with boobs type of writing because the author couldn't trouble themselves to actually learn how to write an authentic female character. This is why I really dislike the writing advice to write a man and then just swap them into a woman, because you're not really taking the time to step into the truth of who your character really is.
Okay, I agree wholeheartedly with that last bit. Never pull the write a man and make them a woman thing. That's lazy and it's transparent. But the stereotype thing. Okay, again, this might be taken the wrong way, but bear with me. What is wrong with the stereotype you gave? What if there is a character who I've written who is female? They like baking and cooking. They like interior design. They do Pilates or yoga, and they enjoy gardening. Now, you say that you should give them one non-feminine thing that they like that rounds it out, but okay, I guess, but wouldn't that be unrealistic? Like, okay, example, I'll give you an example. I've created a cute little girl character who likes dolls, dress up, and playing house. But I also revealed that she can shred a mean Van Halen solo on electric guitar. Doesn't that feel a little out of place? Or maybe if I said I've written a male character who loves fighting, guns, big trucks, rock and roll music, violent video games, yeah! But he also has tea parties with his stuffed animals on the weekends. Again, isn't that a little bit off-putting? And I know what you're going to say. Those are some very over-the-top, hyperbolic examples. And I'll agree with that. They are. But you kind of see my point. There are certain characters that you will write who want to embody a certain aspect between masculine and feminine. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with a character who has a balance of feminine and masculine interests, but I don't think there's anything wrong with a character who prefers feminine pursuits versus male pursuits and vice versa. People like that exist. It's like comparing, to give an example, it's like a comparison of Kasumi Tendo from Ranma 1/2 to her little sister Akane in the same anime. Akane is a tomboy. She loves martial arts. She also wants to, but at the same time, she also wants to look pretty and be more feminine. In fact, she looks to Kasumi as a role model because Kasumi is the stereotypical housekeeper with a love of cooking, cleaning, shopping, and general home maintenance. And Akane constantly wants to be more like Kasumi. She wants to be better at cooking. She wants to be better at cleaning. She wants to be better at all these things, but she's struggling to learn these things. Neither character is bad for what they are or what they enjoy, and it keeps them distinct. Like I said, Akane looks up to Kasumi because Kasumi meets that standard stereotypical model of what you would expect a housekeeper or housewife to be like. That's kind of Kasumi's ordeal. And she's not the opposite. She's not trying to be more like Akane. She's just fine being a housekeeper, which that doesn't make her a bad character. I don't think it does.
Akane, you've become quite the little tomboy.
Maybe I should grow my hair long. Then I could be more like Kasumi.
And one last thing to look out for when you're in danger of stereotyping female characters is authorial insertion. And this is when it's painfully obvious that a male author is trying to say, hey, this is a real woman I've created on the page. See, she's examining her boobs in a mirror, or she just got her period. And usually this happens on like page 2, and it's just so transparent. I'm like, okay, I see you trying. I see you trying on the page now. I see you, the author, rather than the character.
Oh yeah, no, nothing bad to say here. My big problem with authorial insertion is how painful it is when you can just see the fingerprints of the author on display. It is a crude sign that they don't know what they're talking about, and they're just throwing in what they think should be happening. Definitely a sign of an either amateur author or someone not trying very hard. Now, I'll be real, like I said, I'm my own worst critic on this regard, so there will be times I read my own work and I'll just go, man, because I can see my own fingerprints, I can see my own errors, and I can go, man, I really screwed that up. But times when I read other people's work and I see their fingerprints, yeah, no, it's kind of like, dude, man, you need to change that. You need to change that right now. So, no, I'm with you on this one.
Now we are down to our very final mistake when writing women, and I think it's probably the one that a lot of you were expecting when you came to this video. It's number 8, cliched female description. So I'm gonna highlight 3 mistakes when describing female characters. One is reducing your female characters to body parts. And this is particularly problematic when it's the body parts that men might notice first. Hips, boobs, waist, hair. Let's look at a satirical example of how you should never write a female character. Cassandra woke to the rays of sun streaming through the slats, cascading on her naked chest. She stretched, her breasts lifting with her arms as she greeted the sun. She breasted boobily to the stairs and titted downstairs. I mean, that's a satire, but I think there's a grain of truth in that, is that some men write women focusing far too much on their chest. Don't be like that. Please, please, don't be like that.
Okay, right. Yeah, I agree with this, but to a point. Okay, so there are 2 things to consider when writing a description. The first is who is describing the scene or person, and what is the scenario or context of the scene. So, for example, in the example you gave of a woman waking up in the morning and she's naked, is the omniscient narrator describing her, or is it her lover? Because her lover, in a first-person format, might focus on certain details the narrator might not, and it would make sense for him to do so. And as for the context and scenario, what has happened here? Have the two just had a passionate night of sex? Are they on the runaway together? Are they partners in crime? These things go into a description. I'll also say that sometimes these factors do play a role. So watch this. This isn't satire, but I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to retell Cassandra waking up the way you did, but I'm going to do it from the omniscient narrator, and I'm then going to do it from like a lover in bed. So let's start with the omniscient narrator. I would write it like this. Cassandra woke with the rising of the sun, beams of soft golden light filtering in through the blinds. She sat up, her long black hair trailing down her naked skin as she stretched. As she rose up from the bed, her curvaceous silhouette cast a shadow back on the rest of the room behind her, blocking light from reaching Henry, who still remained asleep in bed. She glanced back at him, an arm reaching over to cover her chest modestly as she smiled, remembering the night before and the excitement she'd felt. The euphoria of their honeymoon. So in this example, I have given a couple things. I've given the scenario. We know that it is a night, it is their honeymoon. They've just had a passionate night of euphoria and excitement. That's why she's naked. It is now dawn. She's showing a little bit of modesty by covering herself up. And I didn't go into a lot of detail on boobs, butt, hips, waist, lips, anything like that, because the omniscient narrator is here to tell us a story, not necessarily to be titillated. But now let's go to Henry. What if Henry's the one telling the story? Let's try that. She didn't know I was awake. I stayed perfectly still as she slipped out of bed. I kept one eye slightly open, just enough to see her generous rear end rise out of the bed and saunter to the window. I could see her raven black hair just reaching the small of her back and her hips swaying rhythmically with each step, drawing a smile to my face as I watched her move. She was even more gorgeous now than she was the night before. She turned in my direction, and I shut my eye again, but not before sneaking one more peek at those luscious lips and her ample breasts, which she'd quickly covered in case I was awake to see them. Now, which of these is wrong? I don't think either are necessarily wrong. Both provide a description of Cassandra, but told with two different goals and perspectives in mind. One is setting a scene, and the other is revealing a tone and mood and, well, kind of a perspective from a certain man, which would be Henry. Of course, don't let the only thing you focus on in writing be boobs, butts, and lips, unless you're writing porn, but those things might hold relevance to parties involved. Like, in the case of Henry, he is madly in love with this woman. He is madly in love with Cassandra, so when he looks at her, he's going to focus on the physical attractiveness of her because that is what titillates him. That is what excites him. Does that mean it's the only thing you should focus on? No, not necessarily, but it is going to be relevant to this character. And that's just an example. You know, you could add a little more, you could take a little bit away, it wouldn't really matter. It depends on how much Henry is focused on that. I mean, let's face it, guys. In another example, no one was looking at Jessica Rabbit and describing her as average. They were all focused on certain aspects of her frame. But remember, folks, when it comes to Jessica Rabbit, she's not bad. She's just drawn that way. Okay, let's keep going.
A second common mistake when describing women is to focus on the numbers. Sometimes I'll see female characters introduced and they'll be like, she was 5'7", 113 pounds. C-cup breasts. One, the dimensions are highly improbable. And then two, it's like introducing a male character by focusing on bicep girth and genital girth. It's just tacky and weird. Now, if you're introducing a Jack Reacher sort of character, not Tom Cruise Jack Reacher, but Alan Ritchson Jack Reacher, then yeah, of course you can focus on something like size. But when you list women's measurements, it's like you're putting them up for sale on Craigslist or something, and it's just very cringy and very tacky.
Oh yeah, I actually agree with this, no doubt. Using specific measurements for descriptors is really weird to do because it doesn't feel natural. Look, if you want to give measurements, I'd only use those in a circumstance where the character needs them to do what she needs. Like, I'll give an example. So, one of my older stories, very old stories, Metamorphosis. Chase is a young man who gets turned into a woman. And until he can turn back, he needs to find clothes that fit his body. So I could have written a scene where he goes to the mall and he might have to learn his new proportions and sizes there. As I recall, I think I didn't write anything like that. I think I skipped past that part in the writing because I wasn't exactly interested in going into that kind of stuff with the story, because as far as I'm concerned, if you have to focus on measurements like that, it's just weird 9 times out of 10. Especially since if you do have a male reader, they may not know what those measurements mean. But my point stands, time and place for everything.
And then lastly, when describing women, I would beware of some overused adjectives. Stuff like dainty, petite, slender, or curvy, busty, hourglass. I think I might get some pushback on this in the comments, but let's be clear. I'm not trying to ban these words. I'm not saying never ever use these words. I'm saying if you find yourself using words like this semi-frequently, then I think you have to check yourself and be like, is this a cliched, male-centric vision of a woman? Is there a better way that I can describe her other than focusing on what is sexually attractive about her?
Ooh, lots of things actually. But again, there's context. If you're introducing a character for the first time, physical appearance is going to matter. So words like curvy, hourglass, and petite might come into play. But after that, those words should fade from use in regards to what the character is, because then we might need to know facial features, clothing style, the sound of their voice, the suggested age, other things. Physical attraction should only be consistently drawn to if the purpose of that character is to be an object of desire, like Jessica Rabbit. To go back to Casino Royale, when James Bond first meets Agent Vesper, she's definitely attractive. You know, we get that sense. We could definitely probably describe her as a very attractive woman. But later in the movie, she shows up dressed in a cocktail dress and is meant to look super alluring. In fact, James Bond even tells her to come in from a certain side of the room so that the men playing poker with him will look at her and not at their cards.
Weren't you supposed to enter so the others could see you?
Was I? Forgive me.
He wanted her to use her sex appeal to distract the people around him. And so if that were written into a book, obviously the sex appeal and the physical attraction has to be used. So again, context is everything. And that I think that makes sense. If y'all are having a little bit of trouble following me on that, let me know in the comments. I'll fill in that phrase, but let's keep going.
I hope that was helpful, and my next video is going to be on mistakes you should avoid when writing men, so make sure to check that out.
Oh, that's about it. So we're done with this, but as he said, he's got a second video on the way, which is on the opposite. Oh, it's a message to women writers who are writing men. And so in that case, well, let's go ahead and flip out my avatar. There we go. Get my female writer avatar in there. Yeah, I want to look at that video too, because I'm interested. I want to hear what he has to say. So I'll definitely do a video follow-up to that as well. But before I do want to say, again, two things. Number one, I have nothing against this guy. It's quite the opposite. I'm very impressed. I like a lot of what he's doing, and I love that he is willing to look at both sides. I love that he's being very considerate and saying, hey, you know what, I could get some pushback on some of this. I'm willing to be told I'm wrong or willing to have a discussion or debate. And that's why I made this video, because this isn't meant to criticize him or to go after him. I'm not saying, you're stupid or, you're being this or that. No, I just want to give my thoughts, give my perspective. And the second thing, I love talking writing. As I've said before, I love writing more than I do my gaming stuff. Like, I love storytelling. So getting to actually analyze a person's writing advice is kind of fun for me, because I can apply it to my own writing. And in fact, after watching some of this, I actually did look at some of my characters and go, did I make some of these mistakes? And yeah, I think one or two times, but in my earlier works, I did make some of these mistakes. In fact, even with Rebecca Anderson, I think I made one or two mistakes, but she was such an old character. I wrote her back when I was, a freshman in college, so whatever the case. Anyway, that's all the time we got for the day. I hope you guys enjoyed. Look forward to the follow-up. I will be doing a sequel, so I look forward to coming back to this. That'll be soon, I'm sure. Anyway, thank you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.